Okay, next up, what order is this? Hopefully you said Diptera. So these are the true flies. And this will be the last set of families that we'll do. And we will do the most families in Diptera because it's such a super important aquatic insect order. There are 29 different families, so we're only going to do 6 of those. And some of these are going to be things you're going to be relatively familiar with. You might not be familiar with what they look like underwater as larvae, but you're going to be familiar probably with at least some of these, what the adults look like. So Diptera, if you remember, has the most aquatic species of any order, 3,500 species just in North America. So that's a crazy number. So these are really, really important if you're going to be studying aquatic insects because they're such an important part of so many aquatic ecosystems. There will be some kind of fly larvae in every aquatic ecosystem that you look at. They have elongated, segmented bodies, and they don't always have visible heads. So that's important to remember. So 6 families. We'll get started here. First up is Tapulidae. These are the crane flies. These are things that a lot of times I hear people saying, oh my god, it's a giant mosquito. It is not a mosquito. It does not bite you. It doesn't even have mouth parts. These guys pollinate. They're looking for a mate. They're not going to bite you. And they're huge. So if you see the adults and you see these crazy long legs and something flying around, it's probably these guys. They're the largest family of dipterans. They can be lots of different sizes. They can be anywhere from 3 to 100 millimeters. Some of them are big and chunky. The head is not visible on the larvae. So you're going to see these fleshy lobes on the end of the abdomen. So this is the butt end. The head end is up here, and you can't see their head because it's deep inside their flesh. You'd have to dissect them to see the head. So if you see a long, squirmy thing that has these segments and these fleshy lobes at one end, it's Tapulidae. All right, next up, an extremely important family. You need to know this one for sure. This is Chironomidae. They are very, very abundant, very important. We will talk about them some more in regular lecture. These are non-biting midges. They're very, very common. Some contain hemoglobin and appear red. This is an example. Sometimes in real life they look much more red. When they preserve, though, the color leaches out of them. So if they've been in a vial in ethanol, they're not going to be red ever. They're going to be this pale, sickly white color. But if you're scooping up some mud or leaves from a pond or a stream and you see this red wiggly thing that's clearly a fly larvae and not an actual worm, it's going to be a chironomid. Some people even refer to them as bloodworms, and that's an adaptation, again, for dealing with low oxygen environments. Hemoglobin allows for more efficient transport of oxygen, and so it's very important in areas that don't have as much oxygen. So not all chironomids have hemoglobin. Not all of them are red. They do have a pair of prolegs at their abdomen. They have this characteristic shape that you'll see where the prolegs make them curve under at this end and they curve under at this end. If you'll remember, Diptera larvae do not have true legs in the larval form. They don't get legs until they're adults. So segments tells you it's a Diptera. These do have visible sclerotized heads, and they have these prolegs, which are like fake legs. They're fleshy legs that will tell you that it's a chironomid. All right, next up, something everyone is familiar with, at least in the adult form. Culicidae are mosquitoes. They're very distinctive. The females do bite lots of different kinds of animals to get a blood meal so that they can make eggs, to provision their eggs so that they're as successful as possible. Distinctive part about mosquito larvae or Culicidae is this respiratory siphon. So if you remember back to Nepidae, the water scorpions, they had a butt snorkel. Mosquito larvae have something similar. And if you've ever looked at little pools of water, buckets in the summer, and you see bugs that look like they're hanging off the water surface, those are probably mosquito larvae. So they have this respiratory siphon, and we talked about it with surface tension. It has the hairs that contract when it goes underwater, and they expand so that water doesn't get down their siphon. So good use of water surface tension. They have hairs on the side of their thorax and mouth. They're filter feeders, so their mouths have these like brushes to pull particles out of the water column. And so this thorax tends to be swollen. They have these big heads with prominent eyes that you can see. So hopefully these will be easy to identify. Okay, next up is Chaoboridae. This is probably one you're not familiar with. Phantom midges. These are plankton predators. You can see this giant tooth, and that's the character I want you to look for. If you see something that looks like it has big rat teeth on the front, that is Chaoboridae. They also have these hydrostatic organs. They tend to be very transparent, but a lot of times you can't see them except for these hydrostatic organs, and they help them maintain their position in the water column. They also have this big brush of hairs at the end of their abdomen. They often have a swollen thorax, a little bit like the mosquito, but they don't have a respiratory siphon, and their mouth parts aren't brushes. They have these big teeth. There are some hairs at their mouth, but the mouth looks very different than a mosquito larvae. Okay, next up is Tabanidae. This is another one where you're probably familiar with the adult horseflies and deer flies. They bite as an adult. I think they don't so much take blood like a mosquito does, but they take like a chunk of your flesh. And that's again to provision eggs, and it's usually females that bite because they need more energy in order to produce eggs. This is what the larvae look like. Okay, so the thing you're most likely to confuse this with is Topulidae. If you remember, Topulidae had the big fleshy lobes at the abdomen end. These guys don't have that. No fleshy lobes at the end. They're tapered at both ends, which means they get narrower at both the head end and the abdomen end. They are predaceous. They can be rather large, so 11 to 60 millimeters, and they have these fleshy welts arranged in circles around the abdomen. So these are all fleshy welts that arrange and they go all the way around the abdomen. Their head are also hidden, so that's what makes them like Topulidae, but they don't have those fleshy lobes. They're a different shape and they have these big welts. Okay, next up is Simulidae. If you've ever been to the Northeast in the summer, you might be familiar with these guys. They're black flies. They bite. They are really annoying up in New England and some other places in the United States. They're called the curse of clean water because they are an indicator of good clean water, but they're also really annoying and bite people in the summer. They're very small, 5 to 8 millimeters, and they have clumps of hair out of their mouth. These are their mouth parts. They're filter feeders. They're collecting particles out of the water. If a stream is heavily impacted by sedimentation, they're not going to do well because they're not going to filter feed very efficiently. But so these clumps of hairs kind of look like pigtails. That's what I use. And the thorax has some prolegs, so those fleshy fake legs. And you can see they have kind of an organ that attaches them to rocks. They kind of attach to rocks and then wave their pigtails out to filter feed. and they tend to have more of a swollen abdomen end. So we talked about how mosquitoes and so Culicidae, mosquitoes, and Caaboridae have a swollen thorax. This guy has more swelling at the abdomen end. Okay, so that is the end. Now you have everything you need in order to start practicing identifying families in the assignment for this lab.